Begin, I want to acknowledge that tonight's event is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work in this community. This film is eligible for the Grolsch People's Choice Award and the Grolsch People's Choice Documentary Award. You can vote online. Go to tiff.net/vote. I want to give a big thanks to Roco Films for providing us with this film. You're the second audience at the festival to see Angels Are Made of Light. My history with this filmmaker, James Longley, goes back to the mid-1990s. In fact, my very first job in filmmaking, I was at a small production company in New York City, and they put a film proposal on my desk from James Longley and said, see if you can raise money for this film. It was called Magnitogorsk, set in Russia. James Longley just won the Student Academy Award for another short film set in Russia called Portrait of Boy with Dog. And I was singularly unsuccessful, complete failure, did not raise a cent for Magnitogorsk. But I knew that the filmmaker was someone very special, and I've been following his work ever since. In 2006, he made the extraordinary film Iraq in Fragments, based on a long time being in Iraq during its time of conflict. And after Iraq in Fragments came out and was really recognized as something very special, James told me that there was footage that he had shot for that film for a chapter that didn't make it into that film, but he thought it would make a good short. And I said to him, it was my first year as a programmer at TIFF, I said, if you could make that a short, then we should really consider playing it at TIFF, which we did. It's called Sari's Mother, 2006. Both those films were nominated for Academy Awards. Since then, James has been on a long quest to finish his next film. He first went to Iran and tried making a film about children in a school there. Eventually, because of circumstances of Iran, he couldn't stay. Went to Pakistan. Same thing happened. Because of circumstances, he couldn't stay. And he went to Afghanistan, spent a long time there making this beautifully crafted film. James is not only a director, he's the cinematographer, he's a producer, he makes meaningful contributions in the edit room, and it's our great pleasure to have him visiting from Seattle, Washington. Please welcome James Longley.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks. It's really an honor to be invited to show the film here at Toronto International Film Festival. You are the second audience to see the film, but also the first audience here to see it with the proper sound. The sound was mixed in Dolby Atmos, and this is the only theater in the city that has it. So a special treat for you. And what can I say? I think we're having a Q&A after the film. So if you would like to stay, if you have questions, we'll answer them. And I don't want to say too much before, so enjoy the show.
We'll see you back afterwards. Please welcome back the filmmaker, James Longley. James, I described in the introduction how you had attempted to make a version of this in Iran and Pakistan, finally wound up in Afghanistan. Can you tell me how you chose that country as a place to film and how you found the people that you filmed with?
Yeah, actually, I was in 2001 when the end of 2001 when the United States started going into Afghanistan. I was working on a documentary called Gaza Strip, and I had wanted to go to Afghanistan at that time. But then I thought, by the time I finished that movie about Gaza, we were already about to invade Iraq. So I went to Iraq to make a feature there. And it just took a long time to get around to coming back to Afghanistan, I guess. And I had an idea to make a film about a school because I just think as a filmmaker, it's a very good way to get into a society especially a conservative society where people don't want you to film inside their houses. You need a place to be able to film people in their ordinary life, and a school is a practical place to do that. So I had wanted to do it in Iran, Pakistan, also for the same reasons, that we just don't know those countries very well, and I think there's always room for a film that would explore them and open them up for especially a Western audience.
You don't speak any of the languages of Afghanistan, so can you talk about how you just navigated?
Yeah, so I'm there all by myself, except working with locals. I never bring in a foreign crew. I'm always working with local people in all of the countries where I've filmed. And, you know, because it's, on some level, it's not that difficult to film this stuff. It's just me and one other person filming all of this. I mean, the other person is holding the surround sound microphone, and they have no training in that. I mean, they've never seen, the people I worked with in Afghanistan had never seen a movie in a movie theater. And yet, yeah, it was easy to do it, because actually the stuff we do to make films is not as hard as what people would have you believe.
Well, I have a feeling that you make it look easier than it is for most of us. You bring such a care and attention to your cinematography. You know, can you talk about some of the thought that goes into your cinematography?
Well, so there are a few things. Like, this is a widescreen movie, and I made, like, my student film is also a widescreen film, and I really love those movies from the, you know, especially the 50s and 60s, and you know, my favorite movie is probably like the 400 Blows or something like that, and I've been emulating that widescreen look in the past. But I thought in Afghanistan it's especially appropriate because I wanted to make a film that wasn't just focused on an individual, but rather focused on the society and groups of people, because that's much more natural to Afghanistan, and Iran also is kind of the same, where people don't necessarily like to do things as individuals. They prefer to do them as groups, and you find, you know, it's a much more kind of communal society and less individual based than the United States, for example. And having that wide screen allows you to have all of these what I kind of call like Last Supper shots, where you know, it's groups of people, not just one individual. You can fit a lot of people into the wide frame. That's one thing. And I tried to film the movie. You know, I grew up without a television, and I'm sort of emulating, in a way, the fiction films that I was brought up with. I like documentaries, but I don't necessarily like the way they tend to look. And but I love fiction films, their appearance. And so I wanted to sort of bring the appearance of fiction film into the documentary world, and it's also the sound design and everything else, so that it would be this immersive experience. I think that the power of fiction is that they're really playing with cinema language to put you into a place and make you forget that there's a camera there. And I wanted to do the same thing with documentary. So, you know, I cut out all of the places where people are looking into the camera or talking to me or something like that, just so that I could sort of erase my own presence as much as possible. So while you're watching the movie, I'm hoping that the audience will have a chance to be in the place and not thinking all the time about the fact that there's a guy here with a camera filming all of this stuff. And, you know, I don't know if it's successful, but I'm trying to do this.
This was the first time you'd ever watched it in a Dolby Atmos theater with an audience the way you had meant it to be. Is there a part of the film that where you're really attentive to the sound design?
Well, all of it. I mean, you know, it's complicated. The sound in this movie, there's 300 tracks of audio in the mix. It's more than most fiction films, actually. It's like it's a huge mix, and we didn't necessarily have enough time to do all the things that I wanted, but you know, it's really playing with all of the elements of the music, and I recorded in ambisonic surround, which is this interesting new sound format that you can rotate the sound image or zoom in or tilt, or you can do a lot of things in post-production that you can't do with a normal microphone. And of course, that all takes a lot of time to deal with. Yeah, it was a very complicated post process on the film. Yeah.
Let's take some questions from the audience. Raise your hand if you got one. Yes, right here.
I actually have two, if I can.
Go for it.
My first question was, the film focuses about 90% on boys and men, and we don't really get insight into the female features.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? And my second question, if you want
Let's take the first question first. She's observing that you're mostly focused on boys and men, and we don't get insight into the women.
So, as I'm sure you've heard, there's a gender divide in Afghanistan, and it's very difficult for a man to come with a camera, especially, and film women. And you'll notice there's no like young women in the film at all. There's no teenage girls in this movie, and that's it's because the principal told me in the very beginning, he was a very nice guy, and he said, look, if you can't, there was a girl shift and a boy shift in the school, and then there was another shift that was just the little boys and little girls. And he said, look, you can't film the older girls shift or else you're going to be kicked out of the neighborhood and you won't be able to make your movie. And I'm sure he was right about that. It would have been a big security problem for everybody involved if I'd been trying to film, especially young women. So there are, I excuse myself by the fact that there are documentaries out there which are made by women directors and women cinematographers, and they're filming in an all-girls school with a woman headmaster, and they have specifically made that decision to go in and make a film about, for example, girls' education. There's a film called What Tomorrow Brings by Beth Murphy that does that. And in this film, I was kind of trying to bite off a bigger problem in a way, sort of using a school setting to make a film about the bigger society and also to bring in the history and the political situation, and to do more than just focus on education. I really wanted to make a film that would open up sort of the country as a whole, although it doesn't, of course, show you everything, but I'm trying to make a really big picture film. And I also felt pretty lucky that I was, in fact, able to bring in women's voices, not as much as I would have liked, but Rogul, the cleaning woman, for example, narrates the Civil War. So it's not completely without women's voices, but even she told me, listen, if my grown-up son knew that I was doing interviews with you, he would be very angry. She had to keep it a secret from her own family that she was doing this, and she's a woman in her 60s, with grown children.
Second question. So the question, if you didn't hear it, was asking about the flow of voiceover that you have. What's it drawn from? Is it hours and hours of interviews?
Yes, there's over 100 interviews, and in the interviews I only use a microphone. I don't use a camera, and this is a habit that I got into actually when I was as a student, because it's just less intimidating for the person not to have the camera there. And I also don't like to watch people have on-screen interviews. I think it's not cinema, kind of, for me anyway. And so it was a way to have the thoughts of the people in the film and have a kind of interior monologue of the characters, and have that sort of extra dimension of ideas in the film without actually having to sit through, people sitting in a chair talking to the camera and stuff like that. Yeah.
All right, should we take another question? Is that a hand up there? Yes.
Did you find that the media don't tend to be nostalgic for the past, obviously, and a lot of criticism about what's going on currently or might not in the future? Did you find any time you were there that attitudes became more or less skeptical about what was going on?
Well,
just in case anyone didn't hear it, she sees some nostalgia for the past, cynicism about the present. Over the time you were there, did you see any shift in attitude?
Right. So obviously, since the 1980s, the country has been in a state of occupation and war, and it's much of Afghanistan has been completely destroyed. So of course, people who remember the past are nostalgic for the past because it's a time of peace. And these kids growing up now, as they point out in the film, they don't know really they've never seen their own country at peace, and but they've heard about it, of course, and people long for that. Now, I mean, in the last 3 days, it's just suicide bombings in Afghanistan, for example, going on right now, and the situation seems to be getting worse and worse. And 60% of the country is either controlled or disputed, with the Taliban, and so people are very much afraid of the war, which is currently going on in Afghanistan, completely taking over the country again, and so that a place like Kabul would be, once again simply a war zone, and you couldn't live in it really. People are afraid of this happening because they've seen it in their own lifetimes, not that long ago, and so it's a very real possibility that the whole country will simply degenerate and that the government could fall. Yeah.
Question in the middle there.
Wondering about the religious aspect of the education. Is it quite heavy in Afghanistan, or small percentage?
Question was about the presence of religion in the education.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of religion in the classes as portrayed in the film might be slightly more than it is in reality. And again, this goes back to kind of the gender problem, because most of the teachers that I was able to film were men, and mostly they would be, they might be religion teachers rather than, math teachers or something like that. So, but Afghanistan is officially an Islamic republic, and they do teach religion in the schools, obviously. So it's, they're teaching Arabic so that kids can read the Quran. They're teaching the Quranic studies, and, they have 2 or 3 or 4 classes which are just related to religion. So it's a substantial part of the education. And it's also, when there's a camera there, there's also a tendency for people to get a little bit more religious in the classroom, because, again, there's a fear that, for example, the Taliban could take over again, and what will happen, if they're ever seen, in this film in the future, like, why did you allow yourselves to be filmed? And so it's kind of like a insurance policy maybe for the future to have a little bit more religion than not. But it is, I mean, Afghanistan is, in reality, a very religious country. And I think in the West, we sort of fail to recognize what that's like. I mean, in the United States, we think people are religious, but mostly they're not. I mean, someone will say they're Christian, but they don't really go to church, and, they don't necessarily believe literally that after death, they're either going to heaven or hell or purgatory or something. Whereas in Afghanistan, I would say, the vast majority of people I met, they are actually religious, very serious about the religion. And, it's a big part of life and culture.
On the aisle there. So the two questions: did the teachers or people in the film have they seen the film, and were you experiencing bombings in Kabul during your time there?
So far, no one in the film has seen the film, because I mean, the film is just being seen in public now, and it hasn't been sold yet to anyone, and so I don't want to send a link to the file into Afghanistan, into the school, where it will then propagate throughout the country. Quite yet, maybe perhaps in the future I'll do that, but so I haven't been able just to arrange a practical way for everyone to see the film without simply losing the film. But that will happen. As far as bombing, there were plenty of bombings in Afghanistan and in Kabul while I was there. But, it's a big city of more than 6 million people, and still, even though bombings are happening, the chances that you're actually in that place when it happens are low. I mean, it could have. You could always be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And I was worried about it, certainly. I mean, there were car bombings and bus bombings and just, people with suicide vests. And there were all kinds of security problems in Kabul. And they're getting worse, of course, now. Yeah.
Time for a couple more questions. Right there.
Hi. For some of us who are not familiar with, can you tell us what the balloon that was sent up represented?
Oh,
So she's asking about the balloon in the sky.
right. So there's this Aerostats, this like 117-foot long observation balloon, which the U.S. military has installed in Kabul. There's actually a few of them around the city, and they're just these big military watchtowers, essentially, and they have these camera systems which allow them to see everything that goes on in the city. And the way this works is, if something happens, they simply rewind the film. Like if there's a bombing or something, a car explodes, they'll simply rewind that video and follow that car back to where it came from, in order to. But the ordinary people, view it as, I think most people feel that, if you talk to most people, they'll say, well, this is just those Westerners trying to look at our women, when we're sleeping on the roof in the summer or something like that. And, it's an invasion of privacy for most people. Yeah.
Question in the corner there. Can you elaborate on finding the specific school and picking the children you focused on?
So I looked at about 8 schools in Kabul. One of the schools was out in a village in another province. And I also looked at the biggest orphanage in the country, the state-run orphanage in Kabul. I filmed there for several weeks. I looked at 2 hospitals. So it wasn't the first place that I looked at, but I kept on coming back to it. Just because I loved the location of the mosque courtyard, and it was just a beautiful place to film, frankly. And I liked the principal, and he was very accommodating. And so, in the end, it was kind of it was sort of a practical and also aesthetic choice to film there. But I could have filmed in any number of places, and it would have been a different film, maybe, but similar. Yeah.
We need to wrap up here, but James can be out in the lobby if anyone has further questions for him. You're only the second audience at the festival to see the film. I think there's another screening later in the week. So please tell your friends and spread the word about Angels Are Made of Light. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks especially to James Longley.